Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Gorman, and I'm a first-year full-time MBA student and president of the Entertainment Management Association here at UCLA Anderson. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to Anderson for today's Robertson Lecture Series on Global Business Leadership. This lecture series, managed by UCLA Anderson's Center for Global Management, has been made possible by Mr. Chip Robertson, an alumnus of the fully employed MBA class of 2006, and his family. The Robertson family has dedicated this series to Mr. Leo M. Harvey, a pioneer industrialist and inventor, founder of Harvey Aluminum, and great-grandfather of Chip Robertson. This series serves to provide more opportunities for UCLA Anderson MBA students to acquire global leadership perspectives and showcase important and impactful leaders. I am honored to be introducing today's influential business leader, philanthropist, and our distinguished guest, Ms. Sherry Lansing, founder and CEO of the Sherry Lansing Foundation and former chairman and CEO of Paramount Pictures. Ms. Lansing will join Dean Judy Olian for a conversation that will touch on her career trajectory as the first woman to head a major motion picture studio, her success as an independent producer, and her 13-year tenure as chair and CEO of Paramount Pictures, followed by her full-time focus on philanthropy. Moderating today's discussion is Judy Olian, Dean of UCLA Anderson and the John E. Anderson Chair in Management. Since assuming her role as dean in 2006, Dean Olian has strengthened UCLA Anderson's focus on international business and global management. Under her leadership, the school has raised almost $325 million to support innovative programming and management thought leadership and to advance UCLA Anderson as one of the leading schools of management in the world. She also led the creation of the Center for Global Management, and on behalf of the Center and the Entertainment Management Association, I would like to thank the co-sponsors of today's Robertson Lecture Series, the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and UCLA Anderson's Women's Business Connection. It is a privilege to welcome Ms. Lansing to UCLA Anderson. During almost 30 years in the motion picture business, Ms. Lansing was involved in the production, marketing, and distribution of more than 200 films, including Academy Award winners Forrest Gump, Braveheart, and Titanic. Throughout her film career, she earned a reputation as a trailblazer, a visionary leader, and a creative filmmaker. In 1980, she became the first woman to head a major film studio when she was appointed president of 20th Century Fox. In 1992, Ms. Lansing was named chairman and CEO of Paramount Pictures and began an unprecedented tenure that lasted more than 12 years, during which the studio enjoyed enormous creative and financial success. Sherry Lansing is the founder and CEO of the Sherry Lansing Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to cancer research, health, public education, and encore career opportunities. In addition, Ms. Lansing serves on the University of California Board of Regents and on the boards of many other organizations, such as the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, the Broad Center, and the Pacific Council on International Policy, to name a few. You can read more about Ms. Lansing's fascinating journey in her recently published biography, Leading Lady, which is available outside at the registration table. The book is a revealing portrait by award-winning writer Stephen Galloway of a dynamic, driven woman who overcame unimaginable odds, pushed boundaries, and left Hollywood at the peak of her power to achieve the life she dreamed. As a woman pursuing a career in entertainment, I am inspired by Ms. Lansing's journey and honored to introduce her here today. She is proof that women can be pioneers in any industry, achieve great success in their careers, and have a tremendous impact and give back to society in a meaningful way. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Dean Judy Olian, and our very distinguished, accomplished, and inspiring guest, Ms. Sherry Lansing.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here today.
How fantastic to have you here today, Sherry. For all kinds of reasons, it's wonderful to have you back. Sherry's a great friend of Marian Anderson, as I am, and I have very sad news to report and an announcement that you'll get sometime during the day that Marian passed away yesterday. Sherry and I spoke to each other about this, and we both love her. And we thought we'd share just a few moments and thoughts about what Marian was, and what she meant to us. So, Sherry.
So it's really a very, very sad day for everyone, not just for me and for Judy, but for all of you. I just found out the news about 2 hours before. And at first I thought, well, maybe we should cancel this or postpone it, I guess is a better word. And then I thought about Marian, and I thought, no, Marian would want us to go on. She would want us to do that because she cared so very much about all of you, and she cared, as John did, so very much about the school. Without Marian and John, I doubt that the school would exist. Their philanthropy, their generosity was boundless. It knew no limits. But the thing I most remember about Marian, and will continue to hold in my heart forever, is she was the best girlfriend anyone could ever have. She really was. She was the most unpretentious person I've ever seen. She would take a cab to every event. She never knew what a limo was. She thought, oh, no, I can't afford it. She refused. She thought, I can't afford that. And I think, Marian, you really can. It's okay, you know. But she was saying something more important. She was saying, I don't want to spend my money on something frivolous. I want to give my money away to something that's important. As a girlfriend, she was a cheerleader. She just was so excited for any success that her girlfriends could have. She wanted to be here today and was convinced she would be. I was supposed to have lunch with her on Friday, and she was convinced she would be, and I was planning on visiting her after this at 2:30 this afternoon. She was loyal. She never had a mean word to say about anybody. She was the best girlfriend and the best mother and the best wife. And my life is better because I knew her. And I think all of us will keep her alive in our hearts forever. So we're going to do the best we can today to honor Marian by giving you a great Q&A and hopefully leaving you all happy.
Thank you, Sherry, and I know how much she loved you. In fact, I told her about this event a couple of weeks ago, and she put it on her calendar, and she said, I'll be there. And in fact, I gave her Sherry's book just this past week, and she was so proud of Sherry. There are some gorgeous photos in there. She was mesmerized by those.
Because I don't look like that anymore.
No, you do.
They're old photos.
You do. For me, Marian, I got to know John and Marian when I arrived here, and I got to know them well, and I especially got to know Marian after John passed in 2011. And we too were girlfriends and did many, many things together. Marian was the most grounded, charming, elegant, and intelligent person that you could hope to have lunch or dinner with or just pal around with. I used to kid her that I spent more on my hair than she would ever dream of spending because she was so grounded. She really embraced philanthropy in a very personal way, and it was really her decision to make this monumental gift that will transform our school a couple of years ago because she wanted to protect our future and sustain our future, and she believed in creating opportunity for so many others who are less lucky and less privileged. The thing and Sherry and I just talked about this, after John died, Marian flourished. She was an example of what women can be, and she was so proud of exercising all of the power in her. She was a loving mother, but she was also chairman of Topa Equities after John died, and that's a very complicated business, 33 businesses, multi-billion dollars. And she just flourished. And I think she will always be a role model of, number one, never forgetting your roots and being so grounded. But number two, in how you can continuously discover and be open to opportunities. I mean, Marian was a person that grew up in an era where there wasn't as much diversity or inclusiveness, And she was a champion of openness to all these new trends and new ideas in ways that many of her peers would not have been. She was really a joy to be with, a very fun person, the greatest stories that you can imagine. And she will leave for all of us, certainly for her close friends, but for all of us, a big place in our hearts that feels very warmly for her, but will also enormously miss her. So we thank her, and our promise to her is that Anderson will continue to be as distinguished, as great, as forward-looking, as inclusive, and as open as what she wanted it to be. To Marian. And now to this wonderful, amazing lady. You started out with an upbringing of parents that had some challenges or hardships. You lost your dad when you were 8. Your mom was a widow of 32 and raised 2 young daughters. So what happened then that had influence over you for the rest of your life?
It's actually a great question to ask, especially today. So my father died of heart disease when he was 42, and today he'd be alive. Maybe he'd have a stent or a bypass and he would be alive. And my mother, who had escaped from Nazi Germany, who came to this country when she was 17 years old, all by herself. She didn't know a word of English. She came over on the boat, and she ended up in Chicago with an uncle that she had. And she learned English, and she sold dresses, and she took care of herself. And then she met my father. And she stopped working because that was the way it was in that time. You know, women were supposed to work until they got married and had 2.2 children, or whatever the statistical number was. And she was 32 years old when my dad died. And I can remember this vividly. My sister was about 4.5 and I was 9. And this is probably one of the greatest impacts in my life. These 2 gentlemen came over and they were dressed in suits. And they worked for my dad, who had a very small but successful real estate business. And they came over to my mother's house, and to our house, I should say, in the middle of her grieving. And they looked at her and they said, "Margot, you don't need to worry. We will run the business and we will take care of you." And she looked at them with such strength and she said, "No, you won't. You will teach me how to run the business and I will take care of my family."
Very apropos to
Very
today.
apropos of Marian. I mean, very apropos, and the same kind of inner strength. She knew nothing about real estate. And I can still remember her poring over these books, these long ledgers. And there was nothing about my mother that was self-pitying. She refused to be a victim. And she felt that inside of her, she could learn how to run the business and take care of her family, which she did. And I remember going with my mother to collect the rent. And I remember driving with her, and I remember how she would, you know, take care of the rent and count what she had and make sure that we were living within our means. But we never suffered from anything. I mean, I never felt I had want. I mean, we were a normal middle-class family, I would have to say. And so I saw from my mother, first, that you must never be a victim. And I believed she could do anything, so I guess I believed I could do anything, you know. So, but she also had this wonderful expression. I don't really know what it means, and maybe it's in German translated somewhere, but it was like, "Pull up your socks," which means get on with it, do you know. I didn't know why pulling up your socks meant get on with it, but I knew that that's what she was telling me. And so I learned that. But just to always be resilient, I guess is the word. But there were mixed messages, and then I want to get to my father. The mixed message was that when my mom, after running my dad's business for, I would say, almost 4 years, she met second love of her life, my stepfather, who I call my second father, Norton Lansing, who adopted my sister Judy and myself, and she stopped working and never wanted to work again, because that's what a woman did in that time. And so I got mixed messages. I mean, I got the message of work until you get married, but don't work too much or you won't catch a guy, you know, which is really pretty much
and early in your career, the latter was what she was
totally saying to me, oh my God, no one will want to marry you when you become the head of a studio. That's terrible.
Right.
And she didn't tell anyone, because, so times have changed. Times have really changed. My dad's death was really tragic, because I was 9 and he was 42. And so growing up, he was sick. And so I still have a lot of pain in talking about how ashamed I was that I had a sick father, a father that couldn't really walk around the block because he had heart disease without stopping, and who died unexpectedly in the middle of the night, in my mind, though my mother says this wasn't true, going to the porch because we didn't have air conditioning. And I think I said to him, my mother says I didn't, but I'm sure I did, Dad, you're waking me up. So my last words to him were words of anger. And for many years, I blamed myself for my father's death. And because the rabbi said, you can't go to the funeral, she's too young, I thought he wasn't dead, because a 9-year-old doesn't know what death is. And I thought that he had just left to find a better child, that I was a bad child, and that he had left to find somebody who was a better family.
So did that mean years of therapy?
It did, because what happened, it meant many years of therapy, because I would look for him. If I came into a room like this, I'm going to find him and bring him back. So what it meant was I needed eventually to go to therapy to realize that words don't kill and all of that. But what the good thing was that came out of it was I learned how precious life is. And I learned that life can go like that. So I learned to enjoy every day, and I learned that really young. I mean, by the time I was 12 and overthinking I had killed my father at 13, I learned don't put off. If you have a dream, go after it, and enjoy every moment, and don't put off that vacation also.
When you look at all of the types of careers you have had, there are many, and I'll just list a few that I remember. Bridal model, script reader, actress, again, across from John Wayne, producer, movie studio head, obviously, science champion, cancer champion, corporate board member, community advocate, chairwoman of the UC system. I mean, these are many different careers. So first of all, not asking you to explain how you got into each thing, but what was it each time that drove you into it? And secondly, if you look back, can you connect the dots? Are there connections among them?
So I think I didn't have a master plan. When I came out to California, I wanted to be an actress because that was all I understood from the movies, because you couldn't study film. I know I sound like I'm from another planet, but I'm 72 years old, and at the time I think there was one film school. Now, of course, it's a respected study. So I think what drove me each time was trying the job and either liking it or not liking it. In the case of acting, having no talent was a real problem, but anyway, in the case of that, but also realizing that there was a whole other way to be in the film business. So
you discovered slivers of these
Yeah,
jobs.
So in other words, two things. I didn't have a plan, so whatever job I got, I just did the best I absolutely could. I didn't think, oh, I'm a scriptreader, I want to run the studio. I thought, I love being a scriptreader, I'm going to stay being a scriptreader. And then you master that job. And that job leads to the next job. And then you master that. And that's how I became the head of the studio. And then you think, well, I want to produce movies. It comes from your heart. The causes find you. You don't find the causes. It comes from your heart. It comes from mastering the skill set that the last job did. And the growth comes to the next. And I think I also want to add that when you've mastered something, if you love it more than anything in the world, then keep doing it for the rest of your life. In my case, when I mastered it, I got restless. And I started to look to do other things. And those other things evolved out of the job that I had achieved my goals in. I don't want to say that I was the best person doing it, because of course I wasn't. But I had achieved my goals, and then I would start to get restless and look for something else. You know, there's a theory that you should replant yourself every 10 years. You should rewire. You should start to do other things. And I think change is very good. I think it keeps you young. I think it keeps you curious. So I'm glad that I had all these evolutions.
And that was very explicit when you left Paramount.
Yes.
That you set a goal for yourself. Talk about that. You say rewire, not retire.
So, and I wish that was my expression. I read it in a book, and it's really a good expression. So by the time I was in my, I'd say, mid-50s, I'd been involved in over 200 movies. And it's not that I don't love movies. I still do. I'm still the biggest fan in the world. But I was repeating myself. I'm not saying I was the best person to do the job, because clearly I wasn't. And I made as many mistakes as I made successes. But what I'm really trying to say is I felt as if I was repeating myself. It's a personal thing. I felt as if I wasn't as passionate as I used to be. The highs weren't as high, the lows weren't as low. That thing where I always said, if I ever lose my passion for a job, then I'm going to move on. And the truth is, I was losing my passion. I think Sumner said to me an expression, you just don't have the same juice you used to. You don't care as much. And I said, that's true. But my passion for causes and my passion for life wasn't gone. It's just that my passion was moving to something else. And in this case, my passion, again, was moving to try and make the world a better place, to start a foundation. And all the causes found me. My mother died of ovarian cancer, so cancer research was my cause. If she had died of Parkinson's would have been my cause. I'm a former math and English teacher, so education was my cause. And then I was 60, and people were talking about 60 as if it was 110 years old, until at the time I said to them, you know, Mick Jagger, who was at the time is 61, and I said, he doesn't look old to you, does he? And now he's 73, so he still doesn't look old. So I got very interested in doing encore careers for this demographic of people, 60 plus, who have so much to give, and so that was the third bucket.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment, about your decision to get into the foundation. But let me say, having somebody write an authorized biography about you is a very unique experience. Number one, you didn't write it, and number two, it's not some hostile take on you. It's a wonderful read, great stories, and I think very complimentary. I hope you like the book.
I do, but I have to explain it a little.
Okay, so my
not
question,
everything.
Yeah, my question is, this is a very unique experience to be observing your life once removed by reading the book. So, what did you take away from this that you didn't know about yourself before, and what might you have done differently? This is not quite therapy, but it could be.
So let me go back for a second. So first of all, just to explain this book, which I think is important, was when I left Paramount, people asked me to write a book, and I went, oh, that sounds like a pretty nice thing to do. So I tried. So if you think I can't act, read my writing. I can't write either. It's like, I'm the worst writer in the world. Just read my emails. They're just like 2 sentences, which turns out to be good in this world, as it turns out, but at any rate. And also, I found out that I didn't like to look back. I really don't. I like to live in the present and look to the future and dream about the future. So I quickly realized this was not for me, gave them the advance back, which was going to cancer research, so I felt a little guilty, but just worked just a little harder to get that money for cancer research. And then this man, Stephen Galloway, who was is a very respected journalist, came to me and said he wanted to do a book about my life. And as I always say, in a moment of weakness and out of great respect for him, I said yes. But I had no controls or approval. So what you are reading has caused me a lot of anxiety. I would meet with him, and he would start to ask me questions, and I go, why are you asking me about that? How'd you find out about that? And then I would be very anxious on Sunday when we met, and on Monday I'd be even more anxious. On Tuesday I'd be depressed. I went back to therapy to talk about it. On Wednesday I figured out, he'll never finish the book. I don't have to worry. So this has been a very traumatic experience, but once I read the book, which was at Christmas, and my husband read it, and then I read it a second time, I decided that I could embrace it and support it because, unfortunately, there's a lot that I don't like about it, but unfortunately what I don't like is true. So the question is, what did I learn about myself?
Yeah. And what might you have done differently then?
So I learned that, well, I don't remember, it's somebody telling you about you. So I learned, number one, which I had really forgotten, because my personality, which I learned from the book, is one of complete denial. If there was people that were sexist, I'm not going to pay attention to them. And that was my personality. And by the way, I don't think I'd be that way today because women have gained such strength and you can go to an HR person and report abuse. If I went to an HR person, I'd have been fired. So the only way that I could exist back in the day was to just go like, not letting that person bother me.
And to be even better than anybody else.
Over-prepare, overwork.
Yeah.
So I learned that denial has been a great friend to me throughout my whole life. I also learned, it goes all the way now to Paramount. I remember every movie as being so pleasant. Everything was fine. Nobody fought. I don't remember it. And then, of course, what I was shocked to read is there were massive fights on almost every single movie we made. People didn't talk to each other. They didn't speak. We were suing them. They were suing us. And I'd forgotten about all of it. And then he told it to me. And of course, it came running back and it was really not fun to talk about. And then people were, he would say, so-and-so says that you threatened to sue him. And I went, yeah, I guess I did. It was like, and so that was what I learned. And then I learned some healing things about my mother, that I know this sounds silly, but my mother was not one who, I think because of her past, experienced or talked much about the past. And he actually found people that knew my mother in Germany. They're in their 90s. And I learned what her personality was like. I learned she'd been engaged to someone other than my father, which was shocking in those days.
You learned that she was very proud of you as you were.
She was proud of me.
Which you didn't.
She never told me. She was more kind of like, oh my God, no one will marry you. Oh my God, oh my God, And I learned that she had a scrapbook of all of my clippings, and she had kept it, but she never told me. So.
Another thing that comes out of the book very clearly is that your interpersonal skills, the dripping charm, is a huge business asset, that you won over many, many people that nobody else could have co-opted into the movie, into the deal, because everyone just gravitated to you like a lightning rod.
Well, that's first of all very kind. And so
Read the book, you'll see.
I like people. And one of the things, and I did go into analysis therapy very young in life. I was 26 years old, I think, when I started it. And it was because I was getting a divorce, and I had thought I wanted to be an actress, and at the time, neither worked out. And so I knew I needed help. And I think that therapy teaches you, not to be ashamed of your insecurities, that you can overcome them, you can reparent. And it also teaches you that one day you're feeling fine, and then that 12-year-old just pops up and you're as insecure as you were when you were 12. And you learn that you have the tools to deal with it. So I think what happened with me was I liked people, and I saw that we were all pretty much the same. Someone might yell when they were insecure, someone might get quiet, someone might withdraw. And so I think my interpersonal skills, whatever they may be, first of all, they're unconscious. It's just who you are. But I think they came from great respect for talent, which I do have. I mean, I couldn't act, I couldn't direct, I couldn't do any of those things, so I'm in awe of that talent. And great empathy for the actor who has to put themselves up there and their whole being is exposed. Great empathy for the director, the producer. And and just liking people and realizing that underneath it all, we're pretty much all the same. And then a feeling that was very clear to me, which was I did not have all the answers. I had opinions. Eventually, I had to make the decision. But the best gift you can give is to create a culture, in my opinion anyways, that is a culture where there are no stupid ideas. Everybody feels free to express their opinions. They're not afraid. And then at the end of the day, you have to make the decision because you're the boss. But you make the decision by saying, like when I would pass on a script, I would always say to somebody, and I would do it personally, I would not do it, today I don't know what I do because of emails, but I'd always do it on a phone call rather than a letter because I thought the letter was cold. And I would always say, look, it doesn't work for me and here's why. However, I could be wrong. So just think, when this movie wins the Academy Award, you can tell everybody how stupid I was. And there was like a feeling that you didn't have all the answers. And finally, I loved movies. So I think when people know that you're on their side, all I ever wanted to do was make good movies. That's all I cared about. And so when I would go into a meeting with the various talent that was going to go make the movie, they knew that I cared about the movie as much as they did. So if you start from that common base of caring, you usually can tolerate a difference of opinions. And passionate people, and this is what I learned in the book, will have huge, huge, huge disagreements. And that's because they care so much. And they will fight, they will threaten, they will do these things. And what he doesn't put in the book, when he goes through some of the bigger ones, is today I'm friendly with those people. Because at the end of the day, we came together and we made the movie.
Well, and your interpersonal skills, which are, as I said, unparalleled.
I'm going to end with just one story, which I think they'll find, because of the personality, maybe amusing, which is Mel Gibson, who we argued with a lot about the budget of Braveheart. I wanted it lower, he wanted it higher. And that's always the difference between a studio executive and the talent, because you fight for as much as, they fight for as much as they can get, and I have to be responsible for the bottom line. So there's one incident when we're arguing, and I guess I wasn't in the meeting, but I guess he threw an ashtray or something that was reported. I wasn't in that meeting, but if I had been, he would have thrown it anyways. And so when we finally came to a compromise budget, I called him, because now we're going to go make the movie, and I said, I'm sure you have a poster on your wall, and you're throwing darts at my picture every day. And he said, nope, I don't. You were doing your job, and I was doing mine, and now let's just go make the movie.
Yeah. About the pivot to philanthropy and to this incredible foundation that you have, we often talk with our MBAs about whether they should do the best they can do with their career, get all the resources and the creds that they need, and then do philanthropy, or weave it in. So my first question is, were you involved? I mean, you talked about the causes, cancer, education, stem cell. Were you involved in these as you were running everything, or was it something that you did sequentially?
No, I was involved in it from the very beginning. I think everybody has to find their own path. So you can only do what feels comfortable for you, because if it's inauthentic, that's the worst thing. But from the time I lost my mother, I was 40 years old. I certainly didn't have hardly any resources at the time. I became involved in cancer research. By that, I mean trying to help scientists find the necessary funding. And I didn't have it myself, so I went to actually Dr. Armand Hammer, who was a philanthropist involved in cancer research, and asked if I could be his scout on a voluntary basis and report back. So I would visit, labs, and actually Dr. Judy Gasson was one of the first scientists that, as you know,
she used to head our cancer institute here.
And I can still remember GMCSF. It's amazing that I can remember that, which she was working on to stimulate the blood cell counts when people get chemotherapy. And I thought it was great, and I reported back to him, and his team of Nobel Prize-winning scientists funded her research.
But you took the initiative to go to Armand?
Absolutely, and I'm going to tell you why. So I was involved in that. I was involved in the various education programs. I used to be a math teacher in Watson, East LA, so I saw how underserved they were. And then as silly as it sounds, I often tried to make movies that were entertaining, but the highest form of entertainment to me is movies that are entertaining and also are about something. Sometimes, I mean, China Syndrome was about social, legislation. I mean, I always remember, Gentleman's Agreement, movies, The Pawnbroker, that I grew up on. So I always looked for those movies. I couldn't always make them because sometimes they were too much of a polemic. But I'm proud that we were associated with some movies that The Accused, that moved the needle in terms of social legislation. I can't tell you that Jackass did that, and I thought it was great, and it was a lot of fun, and I loved it. I think it's funny, I can actually tell you the South Park movies do have a social undercurrent to them, but at any rate, for me, the thing that I would say that being involved in something bigger than yourself, something outer directed does, is it keeps your life in balance. When you're doing your career, and you're on the way up, it's life or death. You believe it's life or death. I believed it was life or death. The movie didn't work. I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. But then when you go, in my case, and see someone who's fighting for their life from cancer, or go to a school where the kids don't have math books, then you sort of realize, wait a minute, I'm a very lucky person, and this isn't life or death. So I think having a balanced life makes you better at your job, makes you enjoy life more. Your job is just a part of your life. It is not your life. And if it is your life, you're going to miss so much out of life. I can't tell you. I can tell you it could be very important, but there's a lot more. And I think it keeps your life in balance. It makes you have a better life. And sometimes, ironically, it can actually lead to a good idea, for a movie or for a company. Maybe you'd be the person that can figure out a way to level the playing field in education by something that you're doing technologically. So all of these things, I think, really help you in your personal life and in your professional life.
So I'm going to weave this into a question about when to hold them and when to fold them. So did you have a sense that, okay, and you said, I'm retiring at 60 from Paramount. Did you know that you were going to set up your foundation and how you were going to set it? So there was this natural twain that connected?
So yes, and I especially recommend this for people, who are, I recommend it, I started young, and I recommend it for everybody. And by the way, I started when I was 12. I was holding a can, because I learned from my mother, collecting quarters and, for Hull House, which was an after-school program in Chicago. It was just part of my life, part of my mother's life, and I think I'm grateful for it. Yes, so I started to get restless in my job in the mid-50s. And so I started to put my toes into a lot of other things to see if I liked them. I didn't like some things. I can't say I didn't like them, they just didn't strike my heart. I became a regent, and I remember saying...
That's a tough job.
It's a very tough job, and I remember saying to them, I'm an okay regent now, but I'm going to leave the job when I'm 60. I'm going to be really focused then. And I remember some of my cohorts saying, you're spending too much time at the Regents. I said, well, then I can quit now, or you can wait a few years. I knew what I wanted to do. So the day that I left Paramount, which was I resigned, I remember this really clearly, before Thanksgiving, because I wanted one good Thanksgiving without reading 22 scripts over the weekend. And then it took, and this is also a very sad day, it took about 6 or 7 months till they found my replacement, a man named Brad Gray, who passed away today. So this is really a double sad day. So at any rate, I sat in the job for 7 months, which were wonderful because I didn't have to do anything, because I would go, oh, I can't make that decision. We have to wait till the new person gets here. But I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be cancer research, and I knew it was going to be education. And I picked my new offices, and I already had a life. I already had cancer organizations I was involved in. I was already a regent. What I didn't know was that I was going to get involved in encore careers. That evolved.
Which is a brilliant idea. In a nutshell, you want to...
So Encore Careers is that there's a huge population over the age of 55. You're going to live, I hope, till you're 100 today, but certainly till you're 90, so you're going to spend more time retired than your working career. So what we want to do is rewire, don't retire, and we want to put this demographic back to work in meaningful careers, paying or not paying. And one of our programs, which we're the most proud of, but this is just an example, is there's an incredible shortage of math and science teachers, as we all know. I think this state alone has a shortage of 33,000 math and science teachers.
And I think in one of your op-ed pieces, you list California as 43rd in the country in terms of educational accomplishments. Our dean of the School of Education is here.
There's Marcello.
Marcello, and he's fixing it.
So what you will find is if you drive 20 minutes to South Central or East LA, that the kids do not have math books and they do not have math teachers. They're being taught math by the gym teacher, the English teacher. So this is horrible. This is not a level playing field. So we're taking people who have math and science skills, who used to work at Bank of America or who used to work at Qualcomm or wherever it is, who have either are burnt out from their job, let go because of ageism, or whatever. It doesn't really make any difference. Veterans are a huge source for us. And we're taking them and we're retraining them to be math and science teachers. And they are among the best teachers in the system. We have, I think, a 94% retention rate. And our teachers, so now we have a vet who used to fly for the Air Force. And the kids look at him and they go, wow, now I know why math is important. Or we have the vice president of Boeing, who's one of our teachers, and they go, wow, now I know why math is important. So it's connecting two segments of the population. All of our teachers have to serve in underserved schools, the underserved, and a demographic that I'm sad to say, I think ageism is one of the greatest problems facing our world today, that doesn't have a voice at this moment, and you put them together and they have a huge voice.
So I mean, I could go on forever with Sherry. I'm going to ask one more question. You know, twice that I know of, you left jobs. I mean, once at Paramount and also at Century Fox. And I want to ask you just about how do you decide when it is enough, when it's not right for you, when you're not getting your due respect, and pick up and leave. And I think you encountered that earlier on, I think at Century Fox.
Well, at there were two different things. At 20th Century Fox, when you read the book, and you'll see that at 20th Century Fox, I was 35 years old when I got the job and about 38 when I left it. And I had responsibility for production, but not for the marketing and distribution of movies. And I realized that if I didn't have responsibility for the marketing of the movie, that I couldn't ensure its safety or success. So the job became very unsatisfying to me. And also, in all honesty, the day that I took the job, some reporter called me and he said, I know this is really weird. You're the first woman to run a studio and I'm sure you're so excited. Do you know what you want to do next? And it was a very strange question, but what was equally as strange is I had the answer. I said, oh, I want to produce movies. Because before I took the job, I wanted to produce movies. That was the job I most wanted, was I wanted to really get in there and be responsible for all aspects of the film. You know, come up with the ideas, work with the writers, work with the directors, work on the casting. And so I had to be talked into taking the job. So I left to produce movies for 10 years. And then when I left Paramount, as I said, I just didn't have the same passion for the job. Look, 12 years in the job and 200 movies, that's a lot. And at some point you do feel that you have completed that chapter and that life is about chapters and you know it in your stomach. And to stay in a job and not feel 100% of the passion that you used to feel is a terrible feeling. So it was pretty easy. Your stomach tells you, your head tells you, your heart tells you.
But one other thing that you say there is that, especially among women, some of them don't have the self-esteem.
I think change is frightening to people, men and women.
Right.
And I think you have to talk about it. By the time I left my job at Paramount, I talked about it so much that my friends thought I'd left 2 years before. And I did talk about it, and I talked about, you know, was I frightened? What would I do every day? I remember being nervous I wouldn't have enough to do. I'm just as busy as I was when I was at Paramount. It's just different busy, and it's right for this time in my life. I want to be clear. I loved my job at Paramount. I have nothing but pleasant memories until I read this book and realize that it was a lot harder than I thought. I have nothing but pleasant memories, but I wanted a new chapter. I was getting stale, maybe that's the word, you know. And
one other thing you say in there is that every 10 years, reinvent.
They said. And so when I left, I felt like you guys must feel. I felt like I was graduating graduate school, college, and everything was new, and I was curious. I had to learn new things. It was thrilling.
Okay, please introduce.
Great. Hello, my name is Andrea Wade. Thank you, Ms. Lansing, for being here today.
Sherry.
And so I'm part of the alumni staff now. I'm an alum from Anderson, class of '96, and I joined this staff, Alumni Relations, in December. And I was real interested to hear what you're doing with Encore Careers, because one of the things we're focused on is really making sure that we're looking at alumni in terms of life stage. And so obviously our 55 plus is a huge segment for us, and we know that there are a lot of our alums that are looking to reinvent, but I like the rewire, not retire, saying. I also feel like you're a friend in my head, because I've admired you from afar, and I was a charter corps member of Teach for America.
Oh, wow.
So, and I know you're real involved, and so when I hear about your Encore Careers, I can't help but think there's some influence there, and so my question is, I'd love to hear more about Encore Careers, kind of what the plan is for that. I wasn't familiar with it, and kind of how you're recruiting people. And
so first of all, first of all, we need as much help as we can get, and we're always looking for recruitments, and obviously we're always looking for funding too. But at any rate, what I'd love to say you do, because that would be like an hour of discussion, I'd love to give you our Doug Collins in my office and ask you to call him, and he will put you in touch with the woman who runs the program. And we will show you how, and probably the woman who runs the program will come to your Alumni Association meeting and explain how you can become an Encore teacher, because she's always recruiting people, or one of the people will come.
It's ENCORPS.
Yeah, but if you just call my office and ask for Doug, he will give you and say, Sherry said you'd put me in touch with Catherine, and she'll teach you how to do it. But it is directly related to Teach for America, which is so interesting. So Wendy Kopp came to me, just like I hope, you know, someday all of you will, and she said she had this idea when I was a producer. And she had this idea, what she had written her paper on, as you all know, and it was at Princeton, and it was called Teach for America. And I was one of the early supporters of it. And I said to her in the very first meeting, so I mean, I was producing movies, so I was 38, 39. I said, that's such a great idea, because I'm going to do this movie producing thing, and then I think I'd like to go back to teaching. And I said, and this will be great. And she nodded, and she said, yes. So on her board, every time I would go, I'd say, what about the older people? She said, we're getting to that. I'd say, what about the older people? And then when I left, when I left Paramount, I asked for a meeting with her, because I was going to do the program through Wendy, and she said, it really doesn't fit our model. So I said, really? I said, do you mean for 20 years I've been asking this question and it didn't fit your model? And she said, not really. And so I said, okay, so I'll go off and do it on my own. And that's how it started. But now I think they have a sliver of it in there, but it's not their primary focus. Yeah, yeah. So we want to take our program, we want to expand it to all the states. We don't have the funding to do so, so we're just concentrating on California. But we'd love to come and talk to the alumni. This would be a gift for us. We'd love to recruit them if they're interested. It's a pretty easy process if they're qualified. They obviously just...
I'm actually familiar with one of our alums who did go back to teach. I'm not sure through Encore, but it was science and math that he did go back.
Probably through us.
Okay.
So you know what to do. You'll get to it.
Thank you, Andrea.
Hello, Ms. Shelley Lansing. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank
My
you.
name is Nomi Guzman. And my question for you is, what
Where
is
are
your
you from,
favorite
Nomi?
movie?
Where are you from?
Actually, I'm a graduate of USC. So, and
Okay.
Cal State LA. And Cal State LA.
We love all shapes and forms.
And Cal State LA, okay.
Even if they're burgundy and gold, yes.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan of yours, and I also think you're a friend in my head. And I was wondering, what is your favorite movie, and which movie was the one that? How did you feel when Titanic's budget hit $200 million? And lastly, if you can, I would love for you to sign my book.
I'd be happy to. Okay. I'd be happy to. I'll sit outside and sign the books for people who buy the books. So you have one, so it'll be fine. Asking me my favorite movie is pretty much like asking me my favorite child. So I couldn't answer that question, and that's really the truth. And it's like a Rorschach test. At different times in my life, I remember one movie more fondly than the other because of what maybe I'm going through. And they're like old friends. You visit them again and again, and some of them hold up and some of them don't. And then some of them may surprise you a few years later. The Titanic budget story is in the book, but I'll try and do it briefly. We partnered on Titanic. 20th Century Fox had Titanic. I'm going to try and do this very briefly. It's a huge, long chapter in the book.
An exciting chapter.
It's a very exciting chapter, but maybe this will make you want to buy the book. But anyways, the Titanic chapter was that 20th Century Fox had Titanic. The budget was growing too high. They wanted a partner. We went after it tremendously, and we became their partner. This is where your math ability comes in. So, and the fact that I had produced movies for over 10 years. Looked at the budget, and our production manager said, they only have, I'm going to be off on these numbers slightly, they're in the book, they only have $20 million in for special effects. And I went, that's impossible. This movie's shot on water. Waterworld had just happened. That doesn't make sense. And so we called them. This is one of the fights in the book. And they called them and said, this makes no sense. They said, yes, it does. We mapped this. We know we're right, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, we don't trust these numbers, and we're going to withdraw, which would have been really sad. And then whoever it was on the other end, the production, and then eventually the head of the studio said, well, what do you think the worst this movie can go to? I think it was budgeted at 110, 105, something like that. And I said, 135? And they said, it'll never go to that. We'll cap you. By that it means that we'll split the movie 50-50, and you'll never have to spend more. It was actually 130, than $65 million. You'll never, no matter what happens. So I hate to say this. When it went to $200 million, I slept very well at night because I was completely capped. But I also want to say, in defense of Fox, that we were 50-50 partners, and this is really important because they were great, and they
made it back in spades.
So everyone made it back in spades, you know, beyond. But at one point, I remember going to a conference, and Peter Chernin was asked the question, and I love Peter, and he said, well, we made more money than they did. And I remember going up to him, and I said, why would you say such a thing? I mean, I'm not saying you made a bad deal, but I'm just saying, why would you say such a thing? He said, because we did. I said, no, you didn't. So I went to see John Dolgen, who was my partner. And John Dolgen had financial spreadsheets that went across this room and back, because that's how really good he was. And I said, John, why is he saying they made more money? And he said, well, Sherry, they did. I said, how could they? He said, well, to be honest with you, I had, if the movie made 100 million, if it made 200, I never had a financial spreadsheet that went to $1.2 billion, because no movie had ever done that. And at $1 billion, we switch, and they do make 10% more than us, but we never had that spreadsheet. So they actually did make more money than we do, and I call that a very high-class problem.
Thank you. Okay. Let's do this one quickly, because I think we have class.
Good morning, Dean Olian. Good morning, Ms. Lansing. I'm
You
Joel
are?
Searles. I'm a FEMBA of 2017. Thanks for coming. I'm glad to have you here. Wanted to ask, a leadership question. You've worked in all these different studios. I'm going to read your book, too. You worked in all these different studios, and you've had all these big personalities. What has been probably one of the biggest leadership challenges in dealing with whatever personality that may be that you had to kind of negotiate with to get a film made or maybe a project completed there at the studio?
So it wasn't the people. The biggest challenge that faces anybody who's running a studio is how to make movies that you love that are also commercially successful. Because without that, I don't care how good you are at negotiating deals. I don't care how good the commissary looks or the parking places or how beautiful the studio looks. If you don't make hit movies, you will not last in the job.
Absolutely.
And so the biggest challenge you have is negotiating, first finding scripts that you like, that you love, and then negotiating the fiscal responsibility of how much those movies should cost. Because you could love a script, but if it's going to cost $200 million and you think it should cost 20, you can't make it.
Right.
And the battle always between the creative and the fiscal, and how you hold to fiscal responsibility without hurting the movie, because you're not shooting the budget. So it's this incredible push-pull. So sometimes, you know, you're saying, well, this is it. You can't have a dime more. But if you hurt the movie, what's the point? Because it's not going to be successful. So you held to your budget. And a lot of times, you know, I'm married to a director. And so my husband would say, I'm not shooting the budget. You know, and you know, no one's going to remember, oh, he was very fiscally responsible, except on The Exorcist, which, I mean, he'll tell you stories where I think he went, I don't know, doubled budget, whatever. Well, guess what? Nobody cared afterwards. Right. Do you know, the movie was so successful. But you can be fiscally responsible, the film fails, nobody gives you points. So it's that tension between creative and fiscal responsibility, and it never stops.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask you maybe a very quick last question. We often debate whether you can have it all and have it all at once. And I think that's a particularly pertinent question for women. How do you answer that?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to answer it for me, okay? And I'm not going to answer it for anybody else. And I want you to hear that, because just like, you know, when you ask the question about do you have the cause, it's part of your life or later in your life become philanthropic, I couldn't have had it all except to have it all sequentially. And I knew that for me, life was about choices. And I don't regret any of the choices that I made. So when I was coming up, I was devoted to work. And I knew that I couldn't have a partner and raise children and eventually produce movies or run a studio. I could get to other jobs and balance it, but I knew I couldn't do all of it. Why? Because I knew that wherever I was going to feel I was at the wrong place. If I was with my kids, I'd feel like I should be at work. If I was at work, I feel like I should be with my husband. I used to have this dream that there were leeches, you know, that I just couldn't do it all. So I got very lucky in life. Not everyone does. I had it all sequentially. When I was 47 years old, I met my husband. I have 2 wonderful boys who are my stepchildren, but I can't imagine loving them any more than if they were my biological children. But I couldn't do it all. Now, clearly, other people can, and they're very happy. Someone once said something to me when this question was asked at a conference of women, and someone raised their hand and said, what if your husband had been a stay-at-home husband? I said, well, then I could have had it all. Because, and I don't mean a stay-at-home, and that is changed in the world today.
Right.
Do you know, the respectability of being a stay-at-home husband or a person whose job allows them to stay at home. But please, I'm not saying, I know so many women that do have it all, and you know, but I also think most of them are struggling with the balancing. So I'm only answering it for me, but I just want to say life is about choices. And just make sure, and this is a good way to end, that whatever choices you're making because of your authentic self. You'll never regret them. But just make sure you're not doing it for somebody else.